They kept waiting for the reply that would never come. They stared at their screens, convinced that silence was just your way of catching breath, that soon there'd be another message, another explanation, another chance. But silence was the ending. They just didn't read it right. You had already said everything that needed to be said, just not with words. Every short answer, every delayed response, every quiet withdrawal was you spelling out your goodbye in a language they refused to learn. They thought time would soften you, that you'd eventually come back once the anger cooled, once the emotions settled. But what they never understood is that your silence wasn't a pause, it was peace. It wasn't waiting, it was release. They imagined you sitting somewhere, rehearsing what to say next, still invested, still attached. But you weren't waiting, you were healing. And healing doesn't need an audience. They call it ghosting. You call it closure. Because sometimes words only reopen the wound, and silence is the stitch that keeps it closed. You didn't owe them a final speech. You owed yourself a fresh start. You watched them mistake your calm for confusion. You let them think you'd be back, that the story wasn't over. But the day you stopped explaining was the day the credits rolled. They tell themselves you're still angry, that you're just being stubborn. They don't realize you're simply finished. Anger is loud, finality is silent. They wanted to be forgiven in conversation. You forgave them in absence. And absence hurts more because it doesn't negotiate. It just ends things quietly, completely, permanently. Every morning they wonder if today's the day you'll reach out. And every night they learn again that you won't. Your silence has become their teacher, whispering a truth they never wanted to face. Not everyone who leaves is lost. You didn't slam doors. You left them open because you knew they'd never have the courage to walk through and apologize. That's the cruelty of grace. It doesn't chase. It just lets people live with what they did. Now, your silence is legend in their mind. It hums in every room they enter. It lingers between their jokes, in their stories, in the way they pause when someone mentions your name. They pretend they don't care, but their eyes betray them every time. They remember the sound of your laughter, and now every quiet moment reminds them that it's gone. They replay old conversations, looking for the moment when you began to drift away, but they'll never find it because it didn't happen in one moment. It happened slowly, beautifully, inevitably. You didn't choose silence to punish them. You chose it to protect yourself. Words would have dragged you back into explanations, into cycles, into pain. Silence gave you freedom. And freedom, once tasted, is impossible to trade for closure. You learned that goodbye doesn't always need an announcement. Sometimes it simply needs distance. They thought silence was empty. But silence is full of everything they didn't hear, everything you decided not to repeat. It carries weight. It speaks in echoes. It reminds them that you meant what you never said. Now they understand that not every absence waits to be filled. Some absences are intentional, some are boundaries wrapped in stillness, and yours is both. So let them keep waiting for your return, for your reply, for your reaction. Let them call it pride, ego, stubbornness. You know what it really is? Peace. Because silence doesn't always mean nothing to say. Sometimes it means everything's been said. And when you walked away without a word, you said the most powerful thing of all: goodbye forever. They didn't realize that silence echoes louder than shouting ever could. It fills rooms, stretches across time, seeps into thoughts when everything else goes quiet. Your silence became their mirror, and every time they looked into it, they saw the version of themselves they made you walk away from. They used to think they could handle your distance. They told themselves you'd come back, that you always did. But this time you didn't leave space for a return. You didn't storm out, you simply evaporated. And that frightened them more than anger ever could. Because anger they could argue with, but silence they couldn't manipulate. You took away their favorite weapon conversation. You stripped them of control. When there's nothing left to respond to, the only thing they can hear is their own guilt. You see, silence isn't absence, it's presence without permission. You still exist in their world, just not in a way that gives them comfort. You're in the gaps between their laughter, the emptiness after their stories, the quiet they can't explain when someone mentions your name. They don't know how to mourn someone who's still alive. They don't know how to apologize to someone who won't listen. So they carry it instead quietly, painfully, endlessly. Your silence turned them into prisoners of their own thoughts. And the irony? They once mocked you for being too emotional. Now they're the ones drowning in it. Every unsent text, every deleted draft, every what if is a confession they'll never make aloud. They're haunted not by what you said, but by everything you didn't. They try to rewrite the story now, painting themselves as the victim, pretending they didn't know what they lost. But memory doesn't lie. And deep down they know exactly when you stopped speaking, the moment you realized they weren't listening. Your silence became the verdict. No words, no explanations, just the quiet sentence of consequence. And that's the genius of it. You ended the war without firing a single shot. Now, every time they see someone who moves like you, laughs like you, thinks like you, they freeze for a second, wondering if it's a sign, if maybe you still care. But you don't. You've moved on. You're at peace. And peace, to them, looks like punishment. They thought they could destroy you by breaking your heart, but all they did was break the version of you that needed them. And in its place, silence built something stronger, colder, wiser, unreachable. They call it mystery. You call it evolution. You stopped explaining your worth and started embodying it. And now they're learning the hard way. The quietest people often cause the loudest regret. So let them whisper your name like it's a curse and a prayer all at once. Let them wonder if you still think of them. Because the truth is simple, you don't. And that truth, wrapped in silence, is the most beautiful revenge you'll ever get. They think you forgot them easily. What they don't understand is that forgetting isn't necessary when forgiveness is complete. You didn't erase them, you outgrew them. And there's nothing more painful to watch than someone realizing they no longer have access to the version of you that once adored them. They thought time would work in their favor, that maybe you'd miss them enough to return. But time became your ally instead. Because with every passing day, your silence gained more meaning and their excuses lost more weight. Now, they call you heartless because you stopped answering. But you know the truth. You simply stopped bleeding for people who loved watching you bleed. Silence wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. It was your declaration that peace costs too much to share with the wrong souls. They try to mimic your calm now. They study your indifference, your ability to detach, your new glow that doesn't require validation. It terrifies them how someone they once broke now walks with unshakable grace. They thought they ruined you, but they only introduced you to your higher form. Your silence now speaks in ways words never could. It says, I've seen who you are, and I don't belong there anymore. It says, you don't deserve access to my emotions, my explanations, my energy. It says everything you could never say out loud, with elegance, with finality, with power. They used to believe control meant keeping your attention. Now they see the real control is indifference, the ability to not react, to not chase, to not explain. You mastered that art, and it unsettles them because they can't master it themselves. In their dreams, you still talk to them. You still argue, still cry, still love. But when they wake up, there's only quiet. And that quiet is heavier than any goodbye could ever be. They're haunted not by your absence, but by how peaceful it looks on you. They never imagined that silence could be weaponized, not violently but surgically. You used it not to destroy, but to distance. Not to hurt, but to heal. And in that healing, you created the one thing they can't stand, a version of you that no longer needs them. Now your silence is no longer just absence, it's legacy. It's the monument to your growth built not from revenge, but from release. They thought they had time. That's the first mistake everyone makes, believing the calm before the storm means safety. They didn't realize that your silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. You weren't waiting for them to change, you were waiting for your exit. They didn't notice the way you started detaching piece by piece. The slow withdrawal from conversations, the shorter replies, the fading warmth in your tone. They didn't see that every smile you gave was already a goodbye in disguise. They believed you stayed because you couldn't leave. What they never realized was that you were only staying long enough to learn to understand their patterns, their lies, their motives. You were building the blueprint of escape right under their nose. And that's the beauty of it. You didn't slam doors. You didn't shout. You didn't give them the satisfaction of a grand scene. You just walked out one day so quietly that the silence echoed louder than any goodbye could. They still replay it in their heads, the last conversation, the final glance, trying to find the sign they missed. But by the time they realized you were gone, you had already been emotionally absent for months. You left long before you left. That's what confuses them the most. They can't understand how someone can disappear so completely while still standing right in front of them. But that's the thing about emotional departures, they happen in silence. They always thought you were too kind to walk away, too soft, too loyal. But what they forgot is that even kindness has limits, and even loyalty has logic. You weren't weak, you were patient. And patience, when weaponized, is lethal. You gave them a chance to see their mistakes. You gave them time to fix what was breaking. But instead of changing, they got comfortable with your forgiveness. They mistook endurance for dependence. They thought you'd never go until you did. And oh, how poetic it was. The same people who made you feel small now sit in the ruins of your absence. They thought they could break you into staying. Instead, they broke themselves trying to replace what they destroyed. Now they're haunted by the timing, by how you vanished so effortlessly, because deep down, they know you planned it. You were studying your escape while they were still celebrating their control. You didn't leave because you were hurt, you left because you outgrew the game. You saw every pattern, every manipulation, every emotional trick, and you realized the only winning move was to stop playing altogether. That's what they'll never forgive you for. Not that you left, but that you left on your terms, that you didn't beg, you didn't explain, you didn't give them a single drop of closure. You just became a ghost with dignity. They'll tell stories about how cold you became, how you changed. But the truth is, you didn't change, you just stopped apologizing for noticing. You stopped explaining why their chaos never felt like home. You left with grace, and that's what kills them. Because they expected anger, tears, drama, something they could point to and say, see, they're broken, but you denied them that satisfaction. You gave them nothing but calm. And calm, in the aftermath of betrayal, is terrifying. It means you accepted the lesson, not the loss. It means you saw the fire and chose to walk through it rather than burn inside it. They still think about what they could have done differently. They wonder if they pushed you too far, too fast. But what they'll never understand is that the moment they took your peace for granted, that was the beginning of your goodbye. You became unreachable the second you realized you didn't owe them an explanation. They mistook silence for weakness, but silence is the sound of power when you finally decide to stop arguing with people who aren't listening. They tried to make you doubt yourself, remember? Gaslight you into staying, guilt trip you into settling. But you turned their manipulation into motivation. You studied their tactics until you were immune. By the time you walked away, you weren't running, you were graduating. You evolved from the version of yourself that tolerated disrespect into the version that demands peace. And they still haven't caught up. They wonder who replaced them. They think maybe you found someone new, someone better, but they're wrong. You replaced them with peace, and peace was all you ever needed. They used to think you couldn't survive without them. Now they can't survive the thought that you're thriving without them. That's the cruelest irony of all. Every day they think about reaching out, typing the message, drafting the apology, but they never send it, because they know it wouldn't matter. The version of you they betrayed no longer exists. You were kind once, patient once, soft once, but they taught you why walls exist, why silence is necessary, why detachment is the final form of understanding. You didn't need revenge, leaving was enough. You didn't need closure, distance became closure. And you didn't need them to see your worth, your absence made it obvious. Now they look for you in people who don't have your eyes, your energy, your silence. And every time they fail to find you, they understand a little more of what they lost. You see, they thought they had control, but you were never theirs to control. You were theirs to lose, and they did. So let them talk. Let them pretend they don't care. Let them act like they never miss you. Because deep down they know the truth. You didn't just walk away. You disappeared like a storm that leaves silence too heavy to breathe in. They didn't know you were already gone long before you left. They didn't know every smile was you saying goodbye without moving your lips. They didn't know your silence wasn't confusion, it was preparation. And now they sit in the wreckage of their own arrogance, whispering the same question over and over again. Were they planning it all along? Yes. They replay every memory now, over and over, every word, every look, every silence. They dissect conversations like evidence, searching for clues that were never hidden. But there's nothing left to uncover, because you never concealed the truth. You just expressed it in a language they never learned: detachment. They can't decide what hurts more, that you're gone, or that you were already leaving while they still believed they were winning. That's the thing about intelligent exits: they don't announce themselves. They unfold like poetry, quiet, deliberate, and unforgettable. They talk about you now with a strange mixture of resentment and reverence. They call you cold, distant, ruthless, but underneath that bitterness is admiration. Because even as they try to insult you, they can't help but acknowledge your precision. You didn't stumble away. You calculated your departure. Some nights, they almost convince themselves to reach out. Their pride whispers, "Don't," but guilt screams louder. They pick up their phone, hover over your name, and then freeze. Because deep down they know any message sent now would sound like weakness. And you don't answer weakness anymore. You became the standard of control. The example of what happens when self-respect finally outweighs emotion. You left not out of rage but reason. You didn't burn bridges, you simply stopped crossing them. That's what unsettles them most. You were never dramatic, never loud, never chaotic, just gone. Now they compare everyone to you, unconsciously, unwillingly. Every person they meet, every new connection gets measured against your calm, your intelligence, your silence. And every time someone fails to match that, they remember what they took for granted. You. They tell people you changed. They pretend they let you go. But the truth? You released them before they even realized they were being set free. You didn't destroy them, you simply stopped saving them. And without your energy holding their chaos together, they collapsed under their own weight. They used to mistake your kindness for naivete. They thought your forgiveness meant forgetfulness. But when you left, they learned the truth. Kindness isn't weakness, it's restraint. It's the strength to stay composed while you watch people dig their own graves. Now they understand what silence can do, how peace can humiliate louder than anger ever could. Because while they're still explaining their version of events, you've already stopped caring. You exist above their narratives, untouchable, unreachable, the ghost of the one they underestimated. And the cruelest part? They'll never get closure, because closure requires both people to still care. You don't. You've already moved so far beyond them that even their apology would feel irrelevant. What they don't realize is your peace isn't the absence of them, it's the reward for surviving them. They don't understand how you do it, do they? How you always seem to know. The words before they're spoken, the lies before they're told, the endings before they begin. To them it's impossible, unnatural. It has to be something else. So now they whisper. They must have some kind of gift, they say. They must know sorcery. No, my friend, it's not magic. It's awareness. It's observation. It's patience sharpened into instinct. You watched, you listened, and you learned. You memorized patterns, tones, inconsistencies, the tiny cracks in their armor they thought were invisible. You saw through everything, not because you're mystical, but because you're awake. That's what they fear, not your power, but your perception. They're terrified of someone who can see what they hide, who can look through the masks they spent years perfecting. You didn't need spells to expose them. You just needed silence. And silence, my dear, is the most dangerous magic there is. They call it sorcery because intelligence unsettles the ignorant. Logic looks like witchcraft to the emotional, and calm, real, unshakable calm feels supernatural to the chaotic. They can't process that your strength comes from restraint, not rage. That your clarity comes from detachment, not indifference. So they label it. They call it something otherworldly, because it's easier to fear what they don't understand than to admit they've been outsmarted. You didn't hex them, you read them. You didn't curse them, you calculated them. Every word they said, every contradiction, every hesitation. You stored it, processed it, used it. They thought they were manipulating you, when really, they were narrating your victory. And now they stand there, confused, watching how effortlessly you move through chaos. How every time they try to corner you, you're already 2 steps ahead. They call that luck. They call that energy. No, it's intelligence, the kind that doesn't show itself until it's too late. They wanted to believe they were smarter, but when their tricks failed, their stories collapsed, and their lies tangled themselves, they needed something to blame. And since they couldn't accept that you were better, they decided you must be unnatural. That's the tragedy of their kind. They can't separate intuition from witchcraft, logic from illusion, strength from sorcery. They think wisdom is some secret force only a few are allowed to possess. But you know the truth. Wisdom is earned. Awareness is trained. Control is practiced. They spent their time trying to look powerful. You spent yours learning to be powerful. They built images, you built insight. They used manipulation, you used patience. So when everything fell apart, they thought you cast a spell. But all you did was let their arrogance undo itself. Now they stare at you like a mystery, a walking paradox, too calm to be human, too aware to be normal. Every time you predict their next move, they shiver a little. Every time you smile at their attempts to deceive you, they start to believe their own myth. They must be supernatural, they whisper. No, you're just the result of pain refined into perception, betrayal sharpened into understanding. You were broken enough times to learn the blueprint of manipulation, and now you see right through it. That's not sorcery, that's survival. You became the kind of person who can't be lied to, can't be controlled, can't be fooled, and that makes you terrifying, not because you cast spells, but because you don't need to, because you've already mastered the oldest magic there is, knowing the truth before it's spoken. So let them call it witchcraft. Let them believe you have powers, because they'll never admit the truth that you were simply smarter, calmer, and far more dangerous than their entire illusion. The greatest magic in this world is seeing everything and pretending you didn't. They can't explain you, can they? They sit there stunned, trying to figure out how you always seem to know, how you read the air before a word is spoken, how you predict betrayal before the knife is even drawn. To them, it's unthinkable. It doesn't make sense, so they reach for the only word that does magic. They whisper it like a confession. No one could be that smart, they say. No one could stay that calm. They call it sorcery because calling it intelligence would mean admitting defeat. They think you've got secrets, rituals, some hidden source of power. But the truth is far simpler. You watch, you listen, you remember. While they were busy performing, you were studying. While they spoke to be heard, you spoke to understand. You didn't learn people, you decoded them. They mistake your silence for spells. They think your calm is enchantment. But silence, my dear, is just strategy wearing elegance. You learned that the loudest person in the room always reveals the most, and you let them. They never saw how many times you bit your tongue instead of reacting. How many moments you spent connecting dots they didn't even know existed. You saw their patterns, the little gestures, the tone shifts, the micro expressions. What they call instinct is just the art of paying attention. You don't conjure outcomes, you see them. You read timelines through behavior, emotions through tone, intentions through inconsistency. You didn't need to cast anything, they cast themselves. The funny thing about intelligence is that it terrifies the unprepared. Logic feels like witchcraft to the irrational. Self-control looks like hypnosis to the impulsive. They can't believe that someone could stay so centered while the world burns around them. They call that unnatural. You call it peace. You learned early that people reveal themselves not through their words but through their patterns. Every "I swear" was a tell. Every change of subject a confession. They call that intuition. You call it awareness. So yes, now they think you know sorcery. Because how else could someone so calm, so composed, so silent always end up right? They can't accept that it's not magic, it's math, the human kind. The one where emotion becomes data and deception becomes calculation. They can't believe you don't even flinch anymore. That's what unsettles them most. They throw chaos at you, and you respond with nothing but a slow blink and a half smile. They don't understand that you've already seen this scene before, different faces, same script. And the truth? It is a kind of sorcery, just not the kind they think. It's the sorcery of control, the magic of knowing when not to react, of understanding that prediction isn't prophecy, it's pattern recognition. And you're fluent in it. They call you cold, detached, distant, all the words people use when they realize they can't manipulate you. But that's the trade, isn't it? You gave up warmth to gain vision. You sacrificed being understood for being aware. And now they're terrified of you because they know deep down that you see them. Not their act, not their words, them. The real version they hide from everyone else. You look at them, and suddenly all their masks feel heavy. They're impressed and afraid at the same time. They admire your mind, but it also unnerves them, because you don't need to argue to win. You don't need to shout to be heard. Your silence does all the talking, and that silence feels like judgment, even when it's not. They try to decode you now. They watch how you move, how you breathe, how you respond. But you've learned how to blend stillness into strategy. You reveal nothing. You give them no data to use against you. That, to them, feels supernatural. And maybe it is in a way. Because in a world addicted to noise, restraint is the rarest power of all. You became untouchable not by hiding, but by refusing to engage. You don't play defense. You just let their offense collapse under its own weight. They think you're casting spells when you predict their next move. But no, you just remember what they forgot. You remember how they behave under pressure, what they choose when no one's watching, what they fear when everything's quiet. You've seen their tells, and now every move they make is a rerun. You've made them paranoid, and you didn't even try. You just told the truth calmly. They expected resistance, chaos, maybe revenge. Instead, they got poise. And poise, in the face of accusation, is indistinguishable from power. Now they can't decide what to feel. Respect, fear, curiosity. It all blurs together. They talk about you like a mystery. How do they always know? How are they never surprised? They want to believe it's luck, coincidence, fate, anything but intelligence. Because if it's intelligence, if it's simply you being sharper, more self-aware, then they have no excuse for losing. And ego can't survive that truth. So they call you magic. They make your wisdom into myth because it's easier to worship what they can't match than to admit they could have learned it too if only they'd listened, if only they'd watched. They think you see the future, but you don't. You just see patterns repeating themselves, different faces, same behaviors, history looping in smaller circles. You know when something's ending because endings all sound the same. You know when someone's lying because lies all breathe the same way. You've been burned enough times to recognize the smoke before the fire. And that kind of foresight, it scares people. Because in their world, people react. In yours, people reveal. They tried to study your calm, but calm can't be studied, it has to be earned. You earned it through pain, observation, and restraint. That's why they call it unnatural, because it didn't come cheap. They were waiting for the explosion. They wanted the chaos, the shouting, the breakdown, something to confirm that they still had control over your emotions. But instead, you smiled. You didn't argue, didn't chase, didn't beg. You just looked at them like you'd already seen this scene play out 1,000 times before, and you had. They mistook your calm for confusion. They thought you were suppressing anger, that the storm was still brewing. What they didn't realize is the storm already passed, quietly inside you. By the time they betrayed you, you'd already accepted who they were. And acceptance, to someone like you, is deadlier than rage. They expected retaliation. They got silence. They expected fire. They got ice. And nothing unnerves the guilty more than being met with indifference. Because anger means you still care. But silence means it's over. You didn't block them out of hate. You didn't disappear to prove a point. You just decided that peace was worth more than participation. You walked away like a surgeon leaving an operating room after cutting out a tumor, precise, calm, necessary. They keep asking themselves, why aren't they mad? As if your emotional response is still their business. What they don't understand is that anger is temporary, but detachment is permanent. You outgrew the need for revenge the moment you realized you were already free. They wanted chaos. You gave them stillness. They wanted guilt. You gave them nothing. And now, that nothing is echoing inside their mind louder than any argument ever could. See, they thought they were special enough to disrupt your peace. But when you didn't react, when you didn't even blink, it shattered their illusion of power. Because there's no greater humiliation for a manipulator than discovering they no longer have access to your emotions. You didn't need to post, rant, or explain your side. You let time do the storytelling, and time has a cruel way of revealing who was real and who was just loud. You didn't need revenge. The truth handled that for you. They told themselves you were cold. They whispered that you changed. But the truth is simpler. You just stopped entertaining drama disguised as connection. You stopped playing therapist to people who refuse to heal. You learned the art of emotional control, the kind that terrifies small-minded people. Because when someone can't make you react, they realize they can't manipulate you. And when they can't manipulate you, they call you heartless. They think your chillness is fake. They assume you're pretending to be unbothered. But deep down, they know it's real because your silence feels too effortless, your distance too peaceful. You didn't build walls to keep them out. You built peace to keep yourself in. Now they talk about you like a mystery. They say you just stopped caring one day, as if it happened overnight. What they'll never understand is that detachment is slow, it's quiet. It's death by realizing they're no longer worth your energy. They expected you to spiral, to seek revenge, to prove your worth. Instead, you became everything they never expected: calm, distant, successful, untouchable. And that's what truly burns them. You didn't just survive the betrayal. You leveled up because of it. They wanted you to crumble under the weight of their actions. Instead, you became lighter. They wanted you to break. Instead, you became whole. And now they're left trying to understand how someone they tried to destroy came out glowing. Every time they hear your name, there's a sting because it reminds them of what they couldn't ruin. They threw everything at you: lies, blame, betrayal, and you just absorbed it, smiled, and walked away like it never happened. They keep watching you from afar, waiting for a sign that you're still affected, but you're not. You've moved on so far that even their memory feels small, like something that happened to someone you used to be. You became untouchable not because you fought harder, but because you stopped fighting altogether. You realized peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the refusal to dance to someone else's chaos. They mistake your chill for weakness, but your calm is earned. It's the calm of someone who's seen everything, survived everything, and decided to respond to nothing. That's real power, quiet, steady, and unnerving. Now they're left wondering what it would take to get a reaction from you again, but there's nothing left to provoke, because you've evolved past their reach. You don't live in the same emotional landscape anymore. You exist in a world they can't enter, a world built from silence, understanding, and control. You became the kind of peace they'll never know because they're too addicted to the drama that keeps them miserable. And that's your quiet revenge. Not vengeance, not rage, just the effortless glow of someone who healed without announcing it. You didn't fight them, you outgrew them. And nothing haunts the guilty more than realizing they're no longer relevant in the story they tried to control. You won the battle without showing up for it. You defeated them with nothing but self-control. And now, while they wait for the storm, you sit in sunlight, calm, collected, and beautifully unbothered. Because the truth is simple, they thought you'd be angry. You chose peace instead. And peace, in the hands of someone who's been through hell, is the most dangerous weapon of all. They thought betrayal would ignite you. They were prepared for the screaming, the chaos, the rage. They imagined you throwing words like daggers, shattering everything around you just to prove a point. But you didn't. You just smiled. That smile, calm, quiet, detached, became the thing that haunted them the most. They expected fire, but got frost. They expected to see you crumble, but you just turned away. Because when you've truly seen through someone, when the illusion dies, there's no anger left, only understanding. You didn't lose your temper, you lost interest. You see, anger is still a form of connection. It means they still have a hold on you. But you reached the level beyond it, the level of indifference. You didn't cut them off to punish them. You just realized they weren't worth the effort of an explanation. They don't know how to handle that kind of peace. People like them feed on reactions, on guilt, on conflict, on attention. When you gave them nothing, they starved. You took away their favorite meal, your energy. They tell everyone you changed, but the truth is simpler. You just got tired of watering dead things. You stopped setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. And now, they're freezing in the cold they created. You didn't post about it. You didn't talk about it. You just vanished. That silence was louder than any confrontation could have been. It told the whole story without you needing to speak a single word. They call your calm coldness, but that's projection. What they see as ice is actually discipline. You mastered your emotions, and that mastery terrifies them because they still need drama to feel alive. They wanted you angry because anger is predictable. But calmness is power. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't play by the emotional rules. You became a puzzle they can't solve, and that drives them insane. You didn't win by fighting back. You won by walking away. You understood the truth that not every war deserves a warrior. Some battles are won simply by refusing to enter the arena. Now they replay the past in their heads, searching for a version of you that might still react. They scroll through old messages, remembering the warmth in your tone, the effort you gave. and they wonder how that version of you could vanish so completely. But you didn't vanish, you evolved. You outgrew their chaos. You realized peace wasn't something they could ever give you, so you built it yourself. Quietly, efficiently, permanently. Their biggest confusion is your composure. They can't comprehend how someone they tried to hurt is walking around so unbothered. They expected revenge. They got serenity. They expected tears. They got laughter. Every time they see you now, that calm energy unsettles them, because they know they don't live there in that peace. You do. You earned it through silence, through distance, through the refusal to be dragged back into their circus. They whisper your name differently now, not with arrogance but with awe, because your chill wasn't weakness, it was a revelation. You taught them that some people don't scream when they're done. They just close the door and never return. You didn't need to prove them wrong. You just stopped participating in their delusions. You stopped explaining what should have been obvious. You stopped giving second chances to people who made first chances look like mistakes. They're left wondering, how can they be so calm? But that calmness wasn't born overnight. It came from surviving the storm, from understanding that peace is the loudest form of power. Your indifference became your weapon. Every smile that wasn't forced, every night of uninterrupted sleep, every moment of stillness, all of it was a declaration of victory. Because while they were busy plotting reactions, you were busy healing.